Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, going to Knoxville to check on the Volunteers of Tennessee with Mike LaValle from Last Word on College Football. I asked that you subscribe to my YouTube channel for this very reason. I talk to the best bloggers and broadcasters in the nation on a regular basis, and of course, analysis from myself. You can catch the audio on Podbean, iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. Mike, how you doing tonight?
Mark, doing great. Pleasure to be with you as always.
Yeah, it should be a fun discussion with the Vols with much work to do to climb out of the basement of the SEC Eastern Division after 8 straight losses last season. Jeremy Pruitt in play, and we can always talk about the difference in regimes we have in the past during the offseason, but now that they've taken hold in regards to actual football being played on the field and the boys at work, what are your impressions of the first half of Tennessee spring practice?
Mark, yeah, like you said, we're in the third week now. We're exactly halfway through spring practice in Knoxville. It's pretty interesting to see the difference in the culture between the two coaching staffs. The spring game is April 21st. Like I said, we're halfway there, third week of practice. Some of the biggest changes in the culture there are it's very quiet, which is very different from the previous 5 years under Butch Jones. My first impression with Jeremy Pruitt is he's not that CEO type head coach. He's not a guy that wants to sit back and manage the media, market the program, and kind of manage his assistant coaches from a distance. He's very engaged. He's out there on the practice field. He's with the players. He's not too concerned about those CEO type tasks that a lot of the younger coaches are kind of going with. He's not very out there. He's not very in front of the media. He's not a PJ Fleck. He's not a Butch Jones. He's not one of those guys. Very focused on the field with the techniques, the X's and the O's, not any of the tertiary stuff off the field. So it's been pretty quiet. None of the coaches or the players who have talked to me have talked about individual players or X's and O's. They're just talking about generic things, the intensity of practice, getting better, all of that coach speak. So it seems like they are very focused. Not a lot of hype coming out of the Anderson training complex. They're also a little bit mum on the X's and O's. We think almost assuredly they're going to run a 3-4 defense with Jeremy Pruitt there and Kevin Shurer there, which would be a transition from last season. We think with Tyson Helton there coming from USC, they're going to run a more pro-style offense, but we don't quite know on the X's and O's front yet. So again, the biggest thing coming out of spring ball is how quiet it is, which is much different from the previous 5 years under Butch Jones. Jeremy Pruitt is obviously demanding and hard-nosed. That comes with him being down there right in the on the line of scrimmage with the players every day at practice. So that's also a little bit different. Some things to take away: position changes for the first half of the spring practice. They practiced several players at different positions. Most notably was Tyler Bird, who played on the offense last year. He was an All-American defensive back coming out of Miami, playing high school in Miami. Really showed out the year he was at the U.S. Army All-American Bowl here in San Antonio. Had a great interception, a block extra point that returned and ran away from the field there. Tennessee played him on the offense the previous 2 years. He's practicing at defensive back now, along with his high school teammate Carlin Fields-Amee, who was running back for Tennessee last year. He's also practicing the defensive backfield. Jaquan Blakely, who was a defensive lineman last year, has moved to tight end, which is going to be a position of need for Tennessee going into this spring ball and going into the 2018 season, particularly if they run a more pro-style offense. They're going to have to find an answer to backfill Ethan Wolf there. And then Princeton Font is moving from wide receiver tight end. He's practicing more at running back to kind of fill that third string position that Carlin Fields-Amee vacated by going over to the defensive back of the side. So, those are two storylines. The quarterback battle is also progressing. Jarrett Guarantano and Will McBride are practicing. Not a lot of news coming out of there. They both are kind of neck and neck, not really setting the world on fire. Guarantano does look noticeably bigger. So that'll be interesting to see if that changes his ability to run the offense and really get some first downs that Tennessee just couldn't get last year to sustain drives. But the important thing to remember on the quarterback battle is neither transfer J.T. Shroud or Keller Chris from Stanford is on campus yet. They're coming in this summer. Of course, Keller Chris was 11-2 as a starter at Stanford, so he is a proven commodity. So we certainly won't know anything definitive about the quarterback battle until we get late in fall camp. So you can't really read much into that here in the spring. And then the last thing is a couple of injuries. The most notable, Trey Smith at offensive line. One thing that Jeremy Pruitt has made sure to emphasize was that players will be ready to play at multiple positions within position groups. And defensive back, if you're a safety or a cornerback, you got to be able to play any of those 5 positions: safety, cornerback, or nickel back. Again, 3-4 defense is what they're likely going to play. You got to be able to play on the outsides or in the insides. And then on the offensive lineman, what he says is if the center goes down, the 6th best offensive lineman is going to come in, not the second string center. So all 5 of those guys have to play all 5 of those positions. Tennessee had a bad snap in every game last year, so that's actually a very appropriate analogy for him to make sure all 8, 9, 10 of those guys that can be in the rotation are able to snap the ball, whether it's under center or in shotgun formation, because that was just an absolute gut punch last year on several instances when they had drives going, threatening into the opponent's red zone. Several times last season, they had errant snaps that just killed drives. So that was actually a very appropriate analogy for him to make. So those are really the big 4 takeaways so far from spring practice: the changing culture, the position changes, the players being able to play all positions in a group, and then the quarterback battle. That's really what it looks like from Knoxville halfway through the spring game, halfway through spring practice.
Well, it's certainly a sensible objective to have along the offensive front, to have that next offensive lineman off the bench be the next guy in terms of talent, ability, and ability to step on the field and contribute right away, rather than have a weak link that's obvious just because that person is a guard, because these fronts, especially in the SEC, are so quick, strong, and able to break penetration into the backfield that you just, if you've got an obvious weak link, then that could easily, of course, be taken advantage of.
Yeah,
Talking Tennessee football? Yes,
remember, this is the guy that last year took his All-American cornerback Mika Fitzpatrick and moved him to safety, and then went on to win another national championship. So he's clearly not afraid to take a guy and move him into a different position, no matter how much he's done previously.
Yeah, it's somewhat of a philosophy that goes way, way back to the Tex Schramm, Tom Landry days at the Dallas Cowboys, back when everybody was looking at their roster exclusively and saying, we need another defensive end, we need another inside linebacker, or at that point, a middle linebacker, versus, hey, let's take the best athletes. The best athletes should be on the field, and we'll figure out where they should be on the field. All right, talking some Tennessee football with Mike LaValle from Last Word on College Football. And considering the finish last year, considering where Vol Nation stands in the aftermath of Butch Jones, is there a thought process for the most part? Of course, each individual fan is different, that, hey, we just want to see the guys out there running around in the fall, and we just want to see improvement from the program. And we're just happy to get past that Butch Jones saga. We've moved on to a guy that should be capable. He's proven, at least at the coordinator level, and whatever happens on the scoreboard happens on the scoreboard. Or is there an expectation of, yeah, there's some really good teams in the division and maybe the best team in the country, but besides that, hey, why can't we jump into the mix with Missouri, Kentucky, and so forth?
Yeah, no. The answer to your question is no. Tennessee fans are happy to move on from the Butch Jones era. They are happy to move on from the program's worst season last year. First time ever Tennessee's lost 8 games in a regular season. Ohio State is now the only FBS team, I think, who has played for 10 or more years, who doesn't have an 8-loss season. Tennessee fans are definitely happy to move past all of that, but there is an expectation to win. I think ESPN FBI was published today with expectation. I think Tennessee came in with a 5.8 win expectation this year. I think Tennessee fans, there's certainly muted expectations. There's certainly expectation management going on. I don't think, obviously, Tennessee fans want to win. They certainly want to win, and they expect to win. But I don't think anybody realistically believes Tennessee will win 9, 10, or 11 games. I think most fans are cautiously optimistic for 7, maybe 8. I think most fans expect 6. But there is certainly from day one an expectation for Jeremy Pruitt to come in and win. Like I said, that whole quiet demeanor, not talking to the media, kind of not being out there, that works well if you win after a couple of years. His first recruiting class at Tennessee wasn't as high as people thought it was going to be. People will give him a little leeway this season. He fits kind of the fan base. He's much more aligned with the fan base than Butch Jones was, as far as just kind of personality and demeanor and that kind of thing. So it's going to be a little bit easier for him to relate to the fan base, but in the end, he still has to win. I kind of mentioned Butch Jones and PJ Fleck as examples of those CEO marketing type head coaches. If you're a guy like PJ Fleck, and that can work for you if you win. But if you're a guy like Butch Jones, that can work for you if you win. But when you lose, it doesn't work for you. Same thing with the opposite, which Jeremy Pruitt's kind of the opposite. That he's one of those quiet, reserved coaches that keeps everything inside the training compound. That can work for you if you win. But after a couple of years of not winning, that's not going to work for you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're aligned with the fan base or not. It doesn't matter, if you have all those championship rings as an assistant coach from Alabama or not. There is an expectation to win. It's not, there's expectation management this season, but the expectations will be in full force next season. Now, I'm one of those guys that think that Tennessee might be a little bit better off than a lot of people think. There's a lot of talent on that roster. One of the big arguments about Butch Jones, second only to his clicheism, was the fact that it just didn't seem like all that talent that he recruited, those top 5, top 10 recruiting classes, were ever developed on the field. I still think there's a lot of talent on that roster, particularly the wide receiver position. I think there's some talent on the offensive line position. I think Richmond, Drew Richmond, I think has room to grow. Trey Smith is obviously a great guy, or a great football player. I think there's some talent in the defense too. If you look up front, you got Shai Tuttle, Darrell Taylor, Jonathan Kongbo. I think Jonathan Kongbo is going to be huge once Jeremy Pruitt gets, kind of teaches him. Linebacker Darren Kirkland Jr., if he can stay healthy, he's really good. Daniel Patulli, I think, is going to be a breakout star this year. In the secondary, you got Nigel Warrior, Todd Kelly Jr., if he can stay healthy. I think Tyler Bird's going to make an impact. I think there's talent on this roster. But I still think the expectations are a little bit muted. But Tennessee fans certainly expect him to win. There is no allowance from Tennessee fans for Tennessee just to go out there and play and just have a new day. Tennessee fans are going to go for that. They absolutely expect to win.
Mark Rogers TV talking college football, of course, and also the NFL draft. That transition from the collegiate ranks to the pros, with the NFL draft just 3 weeks away. Josh Rosen, the era somewhat wasted there at UCLA, not winning big, not getting the program or the team to a Pac-12 championship game. Jim Mora ushered out, much to do not necessarily with Josh Rosen's play, but Josh Rosen's inability to stay on the field 2 years ago. And then also the inability of the rest of the offense to develop around him and give him the type of weapons that he needed to win a few more games to keep Mora on the sidelines at UCLA. So Jim Mora, talking to the NFL Network this week, makes the comment about Josh Rosen, that USC product, Sam Darnold, which of course matched up against Rosen and UCLA, actually just the one time because of the injury this season. But and actually the injury at the end of last season, I don't know that those two guys were on the same field at the same time. But Darnold 2-0 against the crosstown rival, of course, set up for the Cleveland Browns to have to make a decision between not only Darnold and Rosen, but Saquon Barkley and the other two quarterbacks in play. So Mora makes the comment that to Sports Illustrated, actually, it was on Sunday, that Rosen is a millennial who, quote, needs to be challenged intellectually so he doesn't get bored, while also calling him, without a doubt, the number one quarterback in the draft. So if you're calling somebody the best quarterback or number one quarterback in the draft, and then saying that the team with the number one choice should not select the quarterback that you coached, that seems to be a bit of a slight, even though Mora somewhat retracted the statement and said that it was misconstrued later.
Well, possibly the reason he said that is because the Cleveland Browns have the number one pick in the draft. So he might be trying to help Josh Rosen out, but by avoiding Josh Rosen being drafted by the Cleveland Browns. I know you're a Cleveland guy, and I know that might be tough to hear. But if I were a head coach and I really liked my quarterback, and Mora and Rosen have a relationship that goes beyond the football field. And if you follow my partner at lastwordonsports.com, Tony Siracusa at Tony Bruin on Twitter, he's the guy that really has the insight on this situation. But if I'm a guy who likes my quarterback who's going into the NFL draft, I'm doing what I can to not get him drafted by the Cleveland Browns. But I think Moore's comments speak to a larger conversation in college football and this whole, the generational change of the athlete. We make a lot of this millennial discussion with our generations, I mean, not just in sports, but beyond sports too. But, my retort to Moore would be, what is bad about wanting to be engaged and keep someone's attention intellectually? And he also said he wants to know the why behind stuff. Well, who else wanted to know the why behind stuff? And that'd be Peyton Manning. And the reason Peyton Manning could run an offense on the field, the reason he could be a de facto offensive coordinator on the field is specifically because he knew the why behind everything. And because he had that context and he knew the why behind everything, he could control everything on the field. So, I think Jim Moore, I'm not really sure. I think there was a little bit there of him trying to wiggle Rosen out of being drafted by the Browns, but I think there was something else there. And I don't follow the UCLA program as much as Tony does, but I would push back a little bit on Moore's comments. And keeping a quarterback engaged and keeping any player engaged, I think, is the job of the coach. And I think any good coach will keep a player engaged and make sure he understands the why of the plays and the why of the techniques, because that's how you get a guy to commit to what you're teaching him. So I really think Moore's comments say more about Mora's coaching ability and Mora's coaching philosophy than they say about Rosen's personality, and certainly about Rosen's ability. I think this is far more enlightening about who Jim Moore Jr. is than it is about who Josh Rosen is, my personal opinion.
There's a particular clip on YouTube that shows Urban Meyer addressing the Ohio High School Athletic Association's coaches, about 100 selected coaches around the high school ranks in Ohio, and speaking to them about teaching and instructing and working with millennials and working with young players and how to get the most out of them, how to keep their attention and get them pointed in the right direction, and to be able to take direction and then implement that, execute that on the field. And in terms of Urban Meyer's approach and belief, he puts all that responsibility and accountability on the coach to instruct and to know how to get through to the player. Now, I think it's a bit overemphasized because he gave no wiggle room to, if that player fails, it's your fault. I understand where he's driving that, to trying to maximize the coach's effectiveness and ability to look for the right answer, the right approach, the right techniques to get through to a particular kid. But of course, if the kid's tuned out and not going to accept the coaching and is uncoachable, there are certainly those guys around. Now, if we're talking about a top 5 pick in the NFL draft at the quarterback position, especially, that's probably not the guy we're talking about here. So I too would think that, considering Jim Moore's issues in building a winner at UCLA versus what he was able to accomplish to a certain extent in the NFL, and it being a different type of athlete at a different stage in their careers that you have to coach, that he just, at least through that one stint at UCLA, wasn't successful in getting the most out of those athletes.
Yeah, well, I mean, to echo Urban Meyer's comments, is one of the fundamental tenets of leadership is for the leader to engage and know how to connect to his to those that he leads, in this case the players on the field. So to be an effective leader, and football coaches are always talking about that they're leaders of men. They're getting these guys ready not just for game day Saturdays, but for life beyond that. And I think that's absolutely the right philosophy to have. But if you're going to be a leader of men, you have to know how your players and the men that you're leading respond, and what makes them click, and how to motivate them to get them to move forward and progress, both as a football player and as a young man. And again, and explaining to them the why behind things is exactly how to do that. And they can't change the fact that they're millennials. So if you don't want a guy that wants to know the why, and you don't want a guy that wants to be connected to things outside of football, then don't recruit that guy. If you're not comfortable leading and teaching that type of player, then don't recruit him. But if you're going to get the best players, these guys are millennials, just simply because of when they were born and the culture they brought up in. If you can't tailor your leadership style to that culture, then it's might be time for you to look for jobs in the NFL, quite frankly.
Mike Laval, last word on college football. Please join him and the rest of the staff right there for college football coverage year round. Mike, we'll have to let you go. We appreciate you stopping by to break things down on the Tennessee side.
Mark, always a pleasure. Please look for me also at Mike L _LWS on Twitter. Have a great night, Mark.